We'll begin with some prayers and then do just a short meditation to get our minds settled down and have a positive motivation for what we are doing. So we take refuge and generate bodhicitta. The first prayer we recite 3 times. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then we'll recite the mantra of Buddha a few times. If you can, imagine the Buddha in front of you, and light is radiating from the Buddha, going in all directions to all sentient beings. And imagine the light coming into yourself, filling your body and mind, and it clears away any negative energy, like negative thoughts or emotions, and also with your body, if there's any sickness or pain, just imagine that being dispelled. And the light also nourishes our potential for attaining the same knowledge and qualities and realizations that the Buddha has in his mind. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Munaye Soha. 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 So let's take a few more moments to try to ensure our motivation for being here, participating in this session is a really positive one, an altruistic one. So in this course, we are learning about ultimate truth, how to develop the wisdom that understands ultimate truth, emptiness, the true nature of all things. So why are we doing this? Ideally, it's not just to satisfy our intellectual curiosity, wanting to know something about this very interesting and profound topic, just to increase our own knowledge, maybe even impress other people by how much we know. So such a motivation would not be the right motivation. That kind of motivation could even increase our suffering, because it increases our self-centeredness, our ego, our pride. And that's not good for us. It's not good for anybody. So the ideal motivation to have to want to learn this topic is to overcome suffering. The understanding of ultimate truth, emptiness, is the remedy to all suffering and the very causes of suffering, the afflictive emotions in our mind, and especially ignorance, the root of all suffering, the root of all afflictions. So the wisdom of ultimate truth is the antidote to that, the medicine that will cure that disease and free us from all suffering and its causes. So that should be our motivation, our reason for wanting to learn about ultimate truth, is to overcome suffering in ourselves. And then ideally, we don't think only of ourselves, we think of others as well, all sentient beings who are suffering as well and wish to be free of suffering and have the ability to be free of suffering. And we've received a lot of kindness from all of them, and it's only right that we repay their kindness. And the best way we can do that is to help them become free of suffering and the causes of suffering. So if we can develop the wisdom of ultimate truth in our own minds, free ourselves from suffering, we will be in a better position to be able to help others. So try to really open your heart to all other beings with compassion, with love, with a wish to benefit them, and see if you can make that your reason, your motivation for being here and listening to this talk. Okay, so this is the third class or talk in this series, and there were quite a few questions that were sent in after last week's talk, so I'll start today with answering those questions. So there's some really good questions. The first question is from Jaya, and it's a little complicated. It's in parts, so I'll kind of break it up into parts. He asked, I guess Jaya is a he. I'm sorry. I hope I got that right. Jaya asked, isn't emptiness the union of conventional and ultimate truth? In the Heart Sutra and other Prajnaparamita texts, I understand that it always concludes that the conventional and ultimate truths are actually one. So this is a little complicated, and I made a slide to explain this. So Shanti, if you could put up the slides. So the first page, or first slide, the next one over. Okay, so there are these expressions that come up in Buddhist philosophical texts, and they can be very confusing, and you don't always find an explanation of them. So I think this explanation will be helpful for everybody who's trying to learn Buddhist philosophy, at least in the Tibetan tradition. So one expression is to say one, and the other one is one nature. Although one nature is also, sometimes they say one entity. So one nature, one entity is the same thing. So there's a difference between these two expressions. So when you say one, if you say two things are one, to be one, they have to be the same in name and meaning. So an example would be pot and pot, or pen and pen. Okay, so the only thing that's one with something else is itself, because only that thing can be one in the same in name and the same in meaning. And so, so if two things are different, either in name or in meaning, then they are not one. So, for example, pot and bumpa. Bumpa is the Tibetan word for pot. So even though pot, which is the English word, and bumpa, which is the Tibetan word, are referring to the same thing, you know, anyway, a pot, different kinds of pots. So they're two words for the same thing in different languages. So therefore, pot and bumpa, because they're different names, they're not one. Another example would be two people who both have the name Jaya. So your name is Jaya, but there's probably lots of other people who are also named Jaya. So if you and another Jaya are together in the same room, you're two different people, even though you have the same name. So you're the same in name, but not in meaning. Okay, that one name, Jaya, refers to two different people. You probably have surnames that distinguish which Jaya you are. Okay, so one, to say two things are one, they can only be one if they are the same, both in name, they have the same name or term, and they are also the same in meaning. They are exactly the same thing, no difference at all. Now, the other term is one nature or one entity. So this has a different meaning. So this refers to two different things that do not appear separate to direct perception. So an example would be a red cloth and its color red. Okay, so we call this a zen in Tibetan, this shawl that we wear. So this is a piece of red cloth, and the color red of this cloth. So the cloth and the color red are not the same thing. They are two different things. The cloth is an object of tactile consciousness. We feel it with our hands. The color red is something we see with our eyes. So they are two different things. They appear differently. Well, they are different objects of direct perception, but we cannot see them separately. When we look at the red cloth, we cannot see the cloth in one place and the red color in another place. Okay? We can't separate those two. They appear together inseparably to direct perception. Another example of one nature would be an object like a table and the parts of the table. So a table is made up of different parts, legs and the top and maybe some drawers. So when we look at the table, we cannot see the parts separate from the table. They appear all together. One, like kind of like one package. That's the way I like to think of it. They're all in one package and they can't be separated. We can separate them conceptually. So conceptually, we can say, well, okay, there's a cloth and the red color of the cloth. They're two different things. So conceptually, we can think about how they are separate and think that they are separate. But when it comes to our direct perception, seeing, hearing, smelling, and so forth, our perception cannot separate them. And then another example, this is important to understand, is a person and their aggregates. And so this is, Buddhism says a person like me or you or any person is composed of aggregates, basically a body, a physical body, and mind, which is broken up into different parts. So basically a body and mind. So we cannot see a person and their aggregates separately. Yeah, you can't have the body and mind of a person sitting on one chair and the person sitting on another chair, and you can see them, separately. It's not possible. Okay, they are one nature. So that's the meaning of one nature. One nature is when you have two things or more than two things, which are kind of all together in one package. And when you look or directly perceive, you can't separate them. You can't pull them apart. So now the two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth, are not one. They are not one. They are two different things. They even have different names. They have different names. We say conventional truth and ultimate truth. So they're different in name, and they're also different in meaning. They are not the same thing. So they are different rather than one, but they are one nature. It said that the two truths, this third bullet point here, the two truths in relation to a single object are not one, but are one nature. An example is our body. If we take our body, our physical body, our body is a conventional truth. But our body has emptiness of inherent existence as its true nature, its actual mode of existence. And that emptiness, the emptiness of our body, is an ultimate truth. Okay, so right here on our body, we have both truths. The body itself is a conventional truth, and the emptiness of our body is an ultimate truth. And those two things, the two truths in relation to our body, are not one, they're different. They are different in name, and they're also different in meaning, but they are one nature. They are one nature because they cannot be separated. You cannot separate. You can't have the body in one place and the ultimate truth, the emptiness of the body, in a different place. So this is probably maybe new information for many of you. And it's like, what? I don't understand this. So don't worry, it takes time to understand. It's just a question of learning this and getting used to this way of thinking. But it is important because it does come up a lot if you want to study Buddhist philosophy. You find these expressions, and like I say, they're not always explained. So anyway, I hope that's clear. The two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth, are not one, but they are one nature. So then Jaya's question continues. When we analyze form, I understand it to have both conventional and ultimate reality at the same time. So that's right. That's correct understanding. The ultimate form, the ultimate nature of form, like our body, is emptiness, which is ultimate truth. Form itself is conventional reality, conventional truth, upon which that emptiness is established. Of course, this is from the perspective of a meditator on emptiness. Okay, so that's correct. You have a correct understanding. And also, in one of the sutras, the Samadhi Raja Sutra, Sutra Unraveling the Thought, it talks about this point. It talks about how the two truths are one nature, but they are not one. And it even points out faults that would occur if you were to say that the two truths were one. One fault would be whenever you look at a conventional truth, okay, you look at a body, you look at a body, if the body and its ultimate truth, emptiness, were one, then just by looking at a body, you would see its emptiness. So then it would be really easy to understand emptiness. You wouldn't have to study and meditate. All you have to do is look at a body or look at any object, any conventional truth. And as soon as you look at it, you would see its ultimate truth. Oh, so it'd be really easy to understand emptiness. And then yogis who are studying and meditating, spending all that time, they're kind of wasting their time. They don't need to do all of that. So that's like an absurd consequence if we were to say that the two truths were one. Another absurd consequence would be that if the two truths were one, then they would have to be exactly the same in every way. So then when you look at a body has form, shape, color. So then the emptiness of the body would also have to have form and shape and color. And if the body was fat, you would have to say, oh, the emptiness is fat. Emptiness is fat. The emptiness of that person is fat. And if there was a skinny person, you would say, oh, that person's emptiness is skinny. But that's absurd because emptiness is not form. It's not something physical that has form and shape and color or any other physical properties. It's a completely non-material thing. So these are some of the absurdities that are pointed out in that sutra, if you were to say that the two truths were one. And then Jaya's question continues, I am confused by Venerable's explanation that everything that exists and is not an ultimate truth is a conventional truth. For me, it seems like conventional and ultimate realities are mutually excluded, not same or one in nature as what I had understood. Okay, so again, the two truths are not one. They're not the same. However, they are one nature. Okay, so you have to understand the difference between one and one nature. And yes, the two truths are mutually exclusive. And what that means is there's nothing which is both the two truths. There's nothing which is both a conventional truth and an ultimate truth. They are different things. However, the two truths do exist inseparably with every object. Okay, so, well, at least with all conventional truths. So every conventional truth, our body, this pen, the Buddha statue, our computer, our phone, all conventional truths have emptiness as part of their being, part of their existence, part of like one package. I think of them as they're together in one package and they cannot be separated. So even though they are together in one package inseparably, they're still two different things. They're not one, they're two, they're different, but they are one nature. So if you can get some books about the Heart Sutra, I think that, there's some by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and other masters who explain the Heart Sutra, and they explain this, that part of the Heart Sutra where it says form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is not other than emptiness. So when you just read those words or you hear those words, then it can sound as though form and emptiness are one thing. They're exactly the same. But that's not the meaning. That can't be taken literally. So it needs to be explained. So if you read a explanation or hear an explanation about the Heart Sutra, then that will be explained. So I hope that's clear. Then next question from Vishad. Can a good deed be contaminated? So don't change the page yet because I haven't, I just made one slide related to Jaya's question. Okay, so Vishad asked, can a good deed be contaminated? The answer is yes, unfortunately. And I will explain that later in today's class. And then Ashit asks, since there is no concept of soul in Buddhism, what is it that is reborn? This is a very good question, and it's been discussed probably from the time of the Buddha. So, and also within Buddhist, different schools of Buddhism, there are somewhat different answers to that question. But all of them would agree that it's some part of the mind, some part of our mind that is reborn. And so the mind of the next life is the continuation of the mind of this life, in the same way that our mind today is a continuation of our mind yesterday. Okay, so yesterday we had our mind and we went to sleep at night, and then we woke up in the morning and we have the same mind as we had yesterday. It's changed, of course, our mind changes all the time. Also, our mind doesn't stop when we go to sleep. It's still continuing and it's having dreams or maybe no dreams, just deep dreamless sleep. But it's this same mind, the continuation of our mind, which is impermanent. Our mind is impermanent. It's changing all the time. And so so we have mind, and our mind is what takes rebirth, but we can't say that our mind is a soul, because people who believe in a soul usually believe in it as being something permanent, unchanging. That's questionable. But anyway, that's what it says in the Buddhist text, that, there are people who believe in a permanent, unchanging soul, and that's the thing that takes rebirth. So Buddhism says, no, that is not the case. Nothing permanent takes rebirth. It's our impermanent mind, changing mind. Also, our mind doesn't have a fixed identity. So, for example, in one life, the mind would be part of a person who, say, an Indian man named Kumar. So in one lifetime, the mind is in that person. Then that person dies, and maybe in the next lifetime, that mind goes to the body of an American woman whose name is Sally. And then, takes on a completely different identity, different language, different personality, different experiences, and so on. And then maybe in another lifetime, that mind is in the body of an elephant and, has the identity of an elephant and doing what elephants do and so on. So in each lifetime, our mind goes from one body to another, one set of circumstances to another, and takes on a completely different personality and different experiences. Okay, so it's not like a permanent soul that has a certain identity and is the same in every lifetime. And also, I sent to Shanti a file that there's a sutra in which the Buddha has this dialogue with his. You actually don't have to put it on the screen. I'm not going to go through all of this, but it's just for you to read, so you can get that from Shanti. It's a sutra in which the Buddha has a dialogue with his father, King Shuddhodana. And the father is asking these questions about rebirth, these same kind of questions, like what is it that takes rebirth? And are we always in the same kind of realm? And do we have the same relatives and so on? So the Buddha answers these questions. And so I thought that could be useful for you. So you can get that from Shanti and read it. And hopefully it will answer your questions. And also Shanti just sent me another question from somebody who asked, about if the mind is impermanent, then what is it? Why is the mind called impermanent if it's continued from one life to the next? The mental consciousness, why is it called impermanent? The meaning of impermanent in Buddhism is changing. When we say something is impermanent, what that mainly means is it's changing moment by moment by moment. It's not fixed. Permanent means unchanging. It doesn't change. It stays the same. Impermanent means it's changing all the time. So our mind is changing. Even the Buddha's mind, right? Even Buddha's mind is changing all the time. But it doesn't change into something else. In the case of the Buddha's mind, it never changes into a non-enlightened mind. It's always enlightened. Buddha's mind is always enlightened, always has these excellent qualities, but it's still momentary. That's just the nature of mind. It's changing moment by moment. But every moment of Buddha's mind is enlightened mind, fully enlightened with all the excellent qualities. And then she'd also asked, whose karma is transferred to the next life? So we can say that the karma of one life, like my karma or your karma, the karma of that person is transferred to the next life. Karma is just imprints on our mind, kind of like seeds or imprints left on our mind. So those are carried from one life to the next, but that doesn't mean we have a permanent self or a permanent soul. So I think this will be explained later. And then another part of this question, what do we mean when we request the Buddhas to help us recall our past lives when there is no entity? So even though there's no permanent self or no permanent soul, there's still memories of one life that can be carried. There's lots of stories of people who can remember their past lives, especially when they're young children, especially in India. Lots of cases of this. You may have heard a little child, will, as soon as they start talking, they'll talk about their other life. And they may even say things like, they may even talk about being married and having a spouse and having children and having a house and having all these things. And the parents are thinking, what are you talking about? But yeah, maybe some of it is fantasy, but there are many cases where they investigate and they find there really was such a person. And this little child has all these very vivid memories of their previous life and can recognize their family members and their friends and so forth. So memories can go from one life to the next. Usually they're more vivid when the person is young, like a small child, but as they get older, they usually fade and they are replaced by all the thoughts and memories of this present life. So just because a person can remember past life doesn't mean that there is a permanent self or a permanent soul. Yeah. The mind is still something impermanent, not permanent. Okay, another question from Ashit. Since emptiness is not a state of mind, then how do I realize it? Is experiencing emptiness conventional truth? Now, emptiness is not mind. Emptiness is not mind. And that's why we talk about the wisdom of emptiness, the wisdom that realizes emptiness. So the wisdom, we're going to go into this today. I'll talk more about what wisdom is. Wisdom is a mind. Wisdom is a state of mind. And emptiness is an object that is understood by a mind. So we talk about having the wisdom, which is a mind in ourself, and then that wisdom knows, understands, experiences emptiness as an object. So it's similar, like your computer is not a mind. Your computer is an object that you can see and think about and understand. So you can have a mind that understands your computer. So in a similar way, we are trying to develop a mind that understands emptiness. And yes, the mind that understands emptiness is a conventional truth. Emptiness itself is an ultimate truth, but when we have the wisdom understanding emptiness, the wisdom itself is a conventional truth because everything other than emptiness is a conventional truth. And that's fine. It's fine to have a conventional truth, our mind understanding an ultimate truth, or wisdom. Sorry, understanding ultimate truth, emptiness. So these are really good questions. They're quite difficult, and I hope I'm answering them in an okay way. Okay, another question came in from Pureza regarding permanent phenomena. I'm confused because I understood that true cessation depends on causes and conditions to be achieved, the realizations on the path. So wouldn't it be a conditioned phenomena? So yeah, this comes because last time I showed a slide explaining or giving examples of impermanent phenomena and permanent phenomena. One example of a permanent phenomena is a true cessation. And a true cessation is the absence of either a portion of our afflictive obscurations, or the obscurations in the mind. So either partially or totally gone. So the ideal ultimate true cessation is when all the afflictions and all the obscurations of the mind have been totally cleared away, like in the Buddha's mind. Buddha has true cessation because he completely eliminated all the obscurations in his mind, all the afflictions and so on. So a true cessation then is an absence, a removal of all afflictive obscurations and knowledge obscurations. So this is actually a really good question, because it does seem as though we we achieve a true cessation by meditating on the path, by learning and practicing and meditating, especially realizing emptiness, ultimate truth. And so by meditating and realizing ultimate truth, we achieve a true cessation. We get rid of all the afflictions, all the obscurations in our mind. So it does seem as though a true cessation comes about through causes and conditions. It's a produced phenomena, a conditioned phenomena, and therefore impermanent. And in fact, in the philosophical treatises, a true cessation is called a result of separation. There's this technical term, a result of separation, which means that we separate our mind from the afflictive emotions, the obscurations, and as a result of that, we have a true cessation. So it is actually called that. However, they say it's not actually a result. Even though it's called a result of separation, it's not really a result because it's not a conditioned phenomena. It's not a impermanent phenomena that is produced from causes and conditions. So let's give a simple example. Let's say you want to clean your refrigerator. So if you want to clean your refrigerator, you first have to remove all the food in your refrigerator. So you take out all the food, and once you've taken out all the food from your refrigerator, you have an empty refrigerator. Okay, your refrigerator is empty of food. That's a bit like a true cessation. If our mind is like a refrigerator and we want to remove all the faults, all the mistakes, all the delusions, all the obscurations, so we get rid of them, and then our mind is like empty of all of that stuff that stands in the way of our attainment of enlightenment. So when you remove all the food in your refrigerator and you have the empty refrigerator, does that emptiness of food come about through causes and conditions that come together and produce that result? In the same way that, let's say you want to make a cake or a curry, something to eat. Okay, so if you want to cook something, you have to get together all these different ingredients and you put them all together in a bowl or in a pot, and maybe you put them in the oven to bake, or you put it on the stove to cook. So you put together all of these ingredients, and then you have this result of this delicious food to eat. Okay, so you're kind of creating or producing something from the ingredients, from the raw materials. And that food, that dish that you've made is like a transformation. All the ingredients have transformed into that result. Okay, so that's an impermanent phenomenon. That dish, that food that you eat, you have produced it by bringing together these causes and conditions, these different parts, and produced something that you can then eat. On the other hand, when you just take out all the food from your refrigerator, you remove all the food from your refrigerator, it's a different kind of process. Okay, it's not that you're putting together a whole bunch of different parts and producing some new thing, which comes about through the transformation of these parts. So it's a different kind of process. It's just the removal. It's just removing a whole bunch of things, and then you have this emptiness. So this takes time to think about, but think about that, and maybe even try it out. Take all the food out of your refrigerator and ask yourself, is this emptiness of food in my refrigerator, is that something that has been produced from causes and conditions in the same way that I produce a food item, something to eat, a pizza or a cake or a curry. Okay, when I put together all these raw ingredients and produce this food, is that the same kind of process? Same kind of process, making a dish to eat and removing the items from my refrigerator. So think about that, and that might help you understand that a true cessation is more like emptying out your refrigerator rather than making a curry or a cake. Okay, there's one last question. Rashika asking about last class, I explained the difference between what exists and what doesn't exist. So what exists has to be something that can be known by valid cognition. And if something can't be known by a valid cognition, then it doesn't exist. Okay, so she's saying, is this saying that for something to exist, there must be some way to perceive it or understand it? Yes, that's true. If something exists, it has to be something that can be perceived, something that can be understood. But that doesn't mean you have to see it. You have to understand it, or any of us, okay? Because, there's lots of people who say, oh, I don't believe in such and such because I don't see it. I don't perceive it. It's not an object of my mind, and therefore it doesn't exist. Would that be valid? Would that be correct? Just because I don't see something, then it doesn't exist. Okay, I can see you shaking your head. So, yeah, the point is, as long as somebody perceives it, as long as there is somebody who has a valid mind, it has to be a valid mind, a correct mind, not a deluded one. As long as somebody has a valid mind perceiving that object, then that object exists. Because in the Buddhist teachings, he talks about different realms of existence, like the Deva realms or the hell realms. He talks about different kinds of beings that most of us are not able to perceive. Most human beings cannot perceive these other kinds of beings. But Buddha was able to perceive them, and also many of his disciples. You don't even have to be a Buddha to be able to perceive these other realms and these other beings. So there are people, beings, who can perceive those other realms and those other beings with a valid cognition. Okay, so, just because we don't see it isn't proof that it doesn't exist, as long as somebody has a valid mind perceiving that. And then the question goes on, does that mean that a random or even nonsensical thought does not exist? I don't think so, because I think in our mind there can be many thoughts or experiences that happen on a more subtle level, or they happen really fast, and we may not be fully aware of them, but just because we're not aware of them doesn't mean they don't exist. Does that make sense? So we might have a really super fast thought or emotion, and it's kind of not at the conscious level, it's at a subconscious or unconscious level, but it still exists. It still happens. Okay, so that's it for the questions. So last time, now you can put the slides back up. Last time we looked at 2 verses from a text by Lama Tsongkhapa called The 3 Principles of the Path. We looked at verses 7 and 8, and those talked about the suffering of samsara that we need to realize about ourselves, that we ourselves are experiencing this suffering, and also other sentient beings. So those two verses help us generate renunciation and bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. So the next verse after those two is verse number 9. And here he's talking about the need for wisdom. So it says, without the wisdom realizing ultimate reality, even though you have generated renunciation and the mind of enlightenment, you cannot cut the root cause of circling in samsara. Therefore, attempt the method to realize dependent arising. So he's saying here that even if you generate renunciation, the determination to be free of samsara, because you realize samsara is like a prison and you just want to get out of this prison. And then you look around and you realize, oh, there's all these other sentient beings who are in samsara as well, and they're suffering too, and I want to help them. And so then you generate bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. So these are wonderful, these are excellent practices to generate renunciation and the mind of enlightenment. And we do need to generate them. But he's saying here that that's not enough. Just with those two states of mind, we cannot cut the root cause of circling in samsara. We cannot free ourselves from samsara. What we need is, in the first line, the wisdom realizing ultimate reality or ultimate truth or emptiness. So that we need that wisdom in order to cut the root cause of circling. And so what is this root cause? So next slide is the root. So this expression is used a lot in Buddhism, the root of samsara, the root of cyclic existence. What is the root? It is the ignorance grasping inherent or independent existence. So this is what I explained last time. We have within our mind this ignorance that doesn't see everything in the way that it actually exists. And instead, it sees things in the opposite way. The way things exist is they are empty of inherent or independent existence. They don't exist that way. They don't exist inherently. They don't exist independently. But our ignorance causes us to see everything as if they did exist inherently or independently. So we see things in the opposite way to how they actually exist. So this is the root of samsara. And it's said that this has been in our mind from beginningless time. It's not something that just started happening in our mind at a certain point in time, and it wasn't there before. According to Buddhism, our mind has been existing forever, from beginningless time, but it's still impermanent. It doesn't mean it's permanent. It's still impermanent because it's changing all the time, moment by moment by moment. And the whole time our mind has been existing, it has had ignorance. So we have never, ever, from beginningless time, we have never seen things correctly. We have never seen the true nature of things. We have always been seeing things as if they had inherent existence. That's why it's so hard to get rid of. It's like an addiction. There's a very strong addiction that our mind has. Okay, the third bullet point says, due to this ignorance, everything appears to exist independently, and our mind believes things to exist that way. We just believe in it. That's how they appear, and we just believe in it. It's like we are mesmerized by this appearance, and we just think, yes, it's true, it's true, it's true. We don't know any different. Then, okay, so that's like our basic way of seeing things. Then, as a result of that, we have egoism, self-centeredness. We feel so we have this ignorance about our own self. We believe I have inherent existence, independent existence. There's this real I, real me, real self here somewhere, and it exists inherently, independently, objectively, something real and solid. So this is how we feel about ourselves, how we see ourselves. And we also are very self-centered. We feel I am the center of the universe. Everything revolves around me. I'm the most important person in the world. We would never, most of us would never say that. We would be too embarrassed to actually say that. But we feel it. That's how we feel. That's how we view things. I am the center of the universe. And then we look out at other people and things, and we see certain people and things that we like. Oh, this is a nice person. Usually because they're nice to me, they make me feel good. And then we develop attachment towards those people and those objects. Other people and things that we see, we'd feel, I don't like that person. I don't like that object. It's unpleasant. It's ugly. So we have dislike towards other people and objects. And then we develop aversion, anger, even hatred. And then there's a lot of things that we don't really like, we don't dislike, we have indifference, kind of neutral feeling, but it's still ignorant. It's still seeing things incorrectly, seeing things as if they existed inherently or independently. So it just perpetuates our ignorance. So these are what are called the three poisons: ignorance, attachment, and aversion or anger. Those are the three main afflictive states of mind that we have. And then the last bullet point says, under the influence of these delusions or these afflictions, we create karma, action. And it's contaminated karma. I explained last time the meaning of the term contaminated. Contaminated means contaminated by ignorance, contaminated by a wrong way of seeing things as inherently, independently existing when in fact they don't. So when we use that term contaminated in Buddhism, that's the meaning of it. So everything we do, all of our thoughts, all of our actions are contaminated by ignorance, a wrong way of seeing things. And unfortunately, this is the case even when we create good karma. So not only does ignorance motivate us to create bad karma, killing, harming, stealing, lying, cheating, that's bad karma. But even when we create good karma, like in Buddhism, we take precepts, we say, I will not kill, I promise to not kill, to not steal, to not lie, and so on. So we make these promises and we live that way, we live ethically. But it's still contaminated. It's still contaminated by ignorance. We think I am inherently existing, and the objects, the people, and so on are inherently existing. So even though we're creating good karma, we're doing virtue, not killing, not lying, helping people, being kind, meditating, practicing dharma. So even when we do good things, virtuous things, it's still contaminated by ignorance. We're still seeing things in a mistaken way. And this karma that we create, both good and bad, causes us to be born again and again in samsara and experience the three kinds of suffering. So this is answering the question that came up earlier about good deeds being contaminated. Yeah, as long as we are ordinary sentient beings, as long as we haven't realized emptiness, everything we do is contaminated, even our virtuous actions. So this is, again, why it's so important to realize emptiness. It's not enough just to do good deeds. Good deeds will be the cause for good rebirth, being born in good situations, like as a human being or as a deva, and have good experiences in our life, but still samsara. We're still in this wheel of life, wheel of dying and being reborn again and again and again, not free. So hopefully, if you think about that and get a sense of that, it really brings up renunciation. I have to get myself out of this situation and then help others as well. And so the the solution, the remedy to this situation is to realize emptiness. It's only the realization of emptiness that will really cut the root of samsara. That's the thing that cuts the root of samsara and enables us to be free of samsara. Okay, so let's look at wisdom itself. What is wisdom? That's the state of mind that we want to develop, we need to develop to get out of samsara and also to help other beings get out of samsara. So wisdom, Tibetan term is sherab and Sanskrit is prajna. The definition is a knower that individually differentiates the faults and good qualities of things that are to be examined. Knower here just means a mind. It's a state of mind. It's actually a mental factor. In the study of the mind, Lorik, we have main minds and we have mental factors. So wisdom is a mental factor. And its function, its job is to investigate or not analyze something in order to understand faults and good qualities. For example, let's say we meet somebody and this person is very friendly and they seem to be very interested in our welfare and our well-being and getting to know us and getting close to us and so on and so forth. And they may make these different kinds of offers and invitations and so on and so forth. So if we are not naive, if we're a person who's very naive, we might just completely believe in this person and go along with them. But if we're not that kind of person, if we're more cautious, because we know some people aren't what they appear to be. There are people who perform scams, people who are out to cheat you, and they may act very friendly, but they're really just trying to cheat you. So if we're that kind of person, then we would use our wisdom to check carefully, get to know this person better, investigate what they're saying and how they're acting, and maybe try to find out more about this person to check, is this person really genuine? Are they really a good person? Are they really out to help me? Or are they somebody who's trying to cheat me? So we would use we would investigate that. So that's just an example of wisdom, how wisdom works. It investigates, it analyzes and tries to check good qualities and faults of an object. And it has the function of overcoming doubt. It frees our mind from doubt. Doubt is when we think, is this true? Is this not true? So we kind of waver back and forth. Doubt isn't necessarily a bad thing. The Buddha said we shouldn't just immediately believe what he says. We should use our wisdom and investigate. So Buddha taught the four truths. Is this true? What the Buddha taught, is it really true? So we need to investigate. And if we do investigate well, properly, we will be free of our doubt. Okay, so it's a very important state of mind, both for Dharma practice, to investigate the Buddha's teachings, but also for our daily life and to, function in the world. And there's different kinds of wisdom. wisdom knowing the ultimate emptiness. But that's not the only kind of wisdom. There's also wisdom knowing the conventional. They talk about these 5 topics of knowledge, which I think it's an ancient Indian tradition. They include grammar, logic, arts, medicine, philosophy. But nowadays we could add other things to this, like science, philosophy, and so on. So that's also wisdom, to know conventional things. And another kind of wisdom, knowing how to help sentient beings. Okay, if you want to help sentient beings who are suffering, you have to be able to analyze what will be helpful for them to relieve their suffering, both in a temporal sense, like providing food, medicine, housing, education, and so on. And then in the Lam Rim, the path to enlightenment, we also use wisdom to understand all the topics of the Lam Rim, like impermanence and karma, precious human rebirth, and so on. So we use our wisdom in all different aspects of the Buddhist path. And next slide, another division of wisdom, they talk about these 3 types of wisdom. Wisdom that arises from hearing and thinking and meditating. You may have heard of this. They talk about this in the Buddhist teachings, that there's this 3-step process we need to follow in order to gain knowledge and gain realizations. The first step is hearing. That means listening to teachings. It can also include studying on our own, reading books on our own. But from hearing teachings, we can develop a certain kind of wisdom. So for example, if you listen to a teacher explaining the Four Noble Truths, true suffering and da-da-da-da-da, and you listen carefully and you think about it and you think, and you understand something and accept what is said, and you think, yes, the Four Noble Truths, these are true. Okay, so that's wisdom from hearing. It's not very deep, it's not very stable, because later, somebody else might tell you something else, and then you start having doubt, and oh, maybe it's not true. But it's an initial level of wisdom. The second kind of wisdom is coming from thinking and reflecting. So that's when we think more about what we have heard, and we try to come up with reasons why it's true. And so if we then, yes, it is true because of this and because of that and because of that. So we actually have reasons to confirm what we have heard. Then we develop another kind of wisdom from thinking on our own. And that wisdom is usually deeper and also more stable, because we've really thought about it and we really come to a conclusion. It is true. And then the third type of wisdom is from meditating. And this is when, on the basis of having heard and having thought about a teaching, we then sit down and meditate on it. We bring to mind what we have understood, and we focus on it with single-pointedness, single-pointed concentration. And then it becomes really deep, really familiar, really powerful in our mind. And we have to keep doing this again and again and again, not just once, but over and over and over again. And this is how we develop wisdom, real wisdom, wisdom that understands something like emptiness. So it is an ongoing process. And it takes effort, it takes time and effort. And in order to have the effort, the energy to do this, it's good to understand its benefits. So in the teachings, it does explain the benefits of having wisdom. Just an example is Nagarjuna, great Indian philosopher, said, wisdom is the root of all good qualities. So having wisdom enables us to develop all the other good qualities of the path, because we understand this path that was taught by the Buddha is something really good, really beneficial. It's good for me and it's good for others. And I want to pursue it. I want to follow it. I want to practice it. And then by practicing the Buddhist teaching, the Buddhist path, we develop all the other good qualities: compassion, love, faith, and so on and so forth. And then the last bullet point mentions complementary practices. So it said that, in addition to the intellectual process of listening to teachings and thinking about them and meditating on them, it's also important to do practices to purify our negativities, because we have a lot of negative imprints in our mind from our past actions, our karma. We have negative karma we've created in this life and past lives. We have afflictive emotions, and these can get in the way when we're trying to develop wisdom. Yeah, we can see sometimes just when we listen to teachings or we try to think about them or we try to meditate on them, all kinds of other stuff can come up in our mind, thoughts and memories and emotions. And this interferes with our practice. It makes it harder to just focus on our practice. So it's said that it's very important to do practices for purification. I'm not going to explain that here. I hope you all have access to other sources to learn about how to purify, but that's an important complementary practice. And also accumulating merit. Merit is like positive energy that enables our mind to focus and understand and gain wisdom and other good qualities. And so there are practices for accumulating merit, such as making offerings, both to our teachers, to the Buddhas, and also helping sentient beings. So doing good deeds, virtuous deeds, that's a way of accumulating merit, building up our positive energy, which will make our practice successful. So this gives us some idea of how to develop wisdom. Okay, but where do we begin? We need to develop wisdom that understands the true nature of all things, because we see all things incorrectly. But do we just start with that? Do we just start by trying to understand the true nature of everything? That would be difficult. What they recommend is to start with our own self, sense of self, I, me, because that's personal. That's with us 24 hours a day. We're always aware of our own self. And also, if we misunderstand our own self, our I, that becomes the basis for lots of other problems, attachment, aversion, as I mentioned earlier. So they recommend that it's good to start with our self, I, me, and how we see ourself. There's actually different levels of emptiness or selflessness with regard to our own self, our own I. And the most subtle one is emptiness of an inherently existing self or I. And that's difficult to understand that right from the beginning. So it's better to start with more coarse levels of like mistaken views that we may have about ourself, and then gradually work to the more subtle one. So it said there are three levels about with regard to ourself, our I, me, three levels of selflessness. And I mentioned before, selflessness is another term for emptiness. Sometimes those two terms are used interchangeably. So there's three levels. The first one is very coarse. This is the emptiness or selflessness of a permanent, unitary, and independent self. I'll just go through this list one, and then we'll go through them one by one. The second one is emptiness or selflessness of a self-supporting, substantially existent self. This is a little more subtle, but it's still coarse compared to the subtlest one. So the subtlest one is the emptiness or selflessness of an inherently existing self. This is the most subtle, most difficult to get to. But we do have to investigate all three of these and develop wisdoms, realizing these different levels of selflessness. So let's start with the first one, the next slide. The emptiness of a permanent, unitary, independent self. So this, as I said, this is coarse, very coarse, but this kind of self is asserted by non-Buddhists, but is refuted by all Buddhist schools. So at the time of the Buddha, and also now, there are, in India, for example, schools of philosophy that teach this kind of a self. They actually say there is a permanent, unitary, independent self or soul, or the term Atman is sometimes used. And also, those of us in the West, some of us were raised in Christianity or Judaism, and also we're taught we have this kind of soul, we call it soul, which has these kind of qualities. So what does it actually mean? Permanent means unchanging. So it doesn't change moment by moment. Unitary means it's one whole thing rather than made up of parts, composed of parts. Independent here, independent can have different meanings, but here it means not depending on causes and conditions, able to stand by itself and not requiring causes and conditions. So, like I said, at the time of the Buddha, there were Indian teachers, philosophers, and yogis, meditators, who believed that there was such a thing. There was this self or soul that had these qualities. So if, according to Buddhism, it doesn't exist, but if such a thing existed, if there was a permanent, unitary, independent self, then it would be something that doesn't change. It couldn't be divided into parts and doesn't depend on causes and conditions. The last bullet point says, in addition, it would have to be something separate from our body and mind. So why that is because our body is clearly not permanent, independent, unitary. It's changing all the time. It's made up of many parts. It depends on causes and conditions. So clearly our body doesn't have these qualities. Our mind isn't as obvious. Mind is a more subtle thing. But if we investigate our mind, we will also see that our mind is not permanent, unitary, and independent. It's something that changes all the time. It's something that has many different parts, many aspects to it. And it's something that depends on causes and conditions. So if we investigate our mind, then that's not something permanent, unitary, and independent. So if there was a permanent, unitary, independent self, it would have to be other than our body and our mind, separate from our body and our mind. So what we need to do is investigate to see if this is true or not. So it wouldn't be enough just to say, oh, well, Buddhism says there's no such thing as a permanent, unitary, and independent self. Oh, I agree, that's true. But if we haven't really investigated that ourselves, and check to see if that's true or not, then that kind of idea may be very flimsy, very shaky, not very solid. And that's not what the Buddha said. The Buddha said, don't just believe what I say, check it out for yourself. And some of us may have been raised in a religion and we're taught that we have some kind of soul inside of us that has these qualities. And so deep down inside, we might still hang on to that belief We might still believe in that. And just to give an example, one time I was teaching a course on emptiness in Italy, and I led a meditation to investigate this sense of self or I, and try to see if our I is something that is permanent and so on. And then at the end of the meditation, we had a discussion about it, and one man said that he felt there has to be an I, there has to be something in there that is real, and like the Christians say, yeah. He'd probably been raised Catholic, because most people in Italy are raised Catholic, and so even though he was there in a Buddhist center learning Buddhism, it sounded like he was still hanging on to, or somewhere in his mind there was still that belief in some kind of real self or I or me somewhere inside. It has to be there, it has to exist. So that came up for him very strongly during that meditation. And so so we may have been affected by that and still be affected by that now. So it's good to investigate. I was actually going to lead a meditation on this, but we run out of time. So I don't have time, but maybe next time, maybe in our next class, we can start with this and just do a meditation to investigate. Is there something inside of me that has these qualities? Self, an I, a me, that is permanent and unchanging, unitary, without parts, independent. If we do think there's such a thing, we should be able to identify it. We should be able to point to it and say, that's it right there. So this is a challenge that we have to try to find such a thing. So next slide. When it comes to the teachings on emptiness and selflessness and so on, people sometimes think Buddhism is saying we don't exist at all. There is no person, no self, no I at all. And I mean, even words like emptiness, selflessness, sometimes it's called non-self. It does sound like that. It does sound like the Buddha is saying, you don't have a self at all. You don't exist at all. That is not the case. That is not what the Buddha is saying. We do have a self, but we just don't exist in these false kinds of ways. So there is a self that does exist. So what the Buddha discovered was that a permanent, unitary, independent self does not exist. That is a fantasy, a mental fabrication, no such thing. That's what he discovered, but we have to discover that for ourselves. We have to check for ourselves. He also discovered, second bullet point, believing in or grasping at such a self is actually a cause of suffering. If we believe in that kind of self, that will just perpetuate our existence in samsara and our suffering. So it's actually harmful to believe in that. But, third bullet point, there is a conventionally existing self that eats, sleeps, that feels happy, feels unhappy, creates karma, meditates, attains liberation and enlightenment. There is a self that exists conventionally and that does all those things. Like right now, there's a self that is talking over here, my side, and on your side, there's a self that's listening, hopefully listening, or maybe falling asleep or thinking about something else. But yeah, we do exist. Buddha isn't saying we don't exist at all. We do exist. But what is the self that does exist? This is something we have to discover on our own, but the answer, the Buddhist, all the Buddhist schools of philosophy, they all agree that the last bullet point. The self that does exist is the I that is imputed in dependence on 4 or 5 aggregates. So it's just the label or name I, me, myself, or whatever our name happens to be, that is imputed or designated or labeled in dependence on our aggregates. Now, the reason it says 4 or 5 aggregates, most of us have 5 aggregates. Most of us have 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are the body and then different parts of our mind. I'll explain that next time, what the aggregates are. But there are some beings. There's a realm called the formless realm, Arupa Dhatu in Sanskrit, formless realm. There are beings there who don't have a body. They just have a mind. They live just with a mind, and it's a highly developed mind in the sense of samadhi, meditative absorption. They've developed very, very strong concentration, samadhi, and as a result of that, they've kind of purified their mind to a certain extent, and they're born in a place where there's no form, no physical form, just mind in a state of very peaceful meditation. It's still samsara, though. Unfortunately, they're not free of samsara, but they only have 4 aggregates, mental aggregates. They don't have 5. So, but they still have a person, still an I, a person there that's labeled on their aggregates. So there's been a lot of information today, and I didn't have the time to meditate, to do a meditation, but I promise next week when we meet again, we will start with the meditation to investigate. But you can also do this on your own between now and next week. Just ask yourself, am I permanent? Is there a permanent, unchanging I? Is there an I that is unitary, can't be broken up into parts? Is there an I that is independent, able to stand by itself, independent of all other causes and conditions? So it's good to investigate it. This is a more coarse level of selflessness or emptiness, but it does help us to get to the more subtle one, like the emptiness of inherent existence. Okay, so let's look at the last slide. The last slide is just a summary of what we've looked at today. So we looked at the root of samsara, what that is, and wisdom, generally what wisdom means, different kinds of wisdom. And then we looked at 3 levels of emptiness or selflessness with regard to ourself, our own person, and a brief introduction to the more coarse level of selflessness, the emptiness of a permanent, unitary, and independent self, and a brief explanation of the self that does exist, just so you're not left thinking, oh, maybe I don't exist at all. There's no me. There's no I. That's actually very dangerous. You don't want to go there. When I first went to India and started studying Buddhism in Dharamsala, I heard about one Western woman who had been there for a while. And I guess she heard about emptiness and she was meditating on emptiness. And she ended up thinking, nothing exists. I don't exist. Nobody else exists. Nothing exists. And she was, I didn't actually meet her, but apparently she was kind of like a zombie, like a vegetable, just sitting there all day, thinking nothing exists. And eventually they had to take her to some kind of mental hospital. I don't know what happened to her in the end. I hope she came out of that state. But that just shows what can happen if you're not careful with regard to this topic of emptiness or selflessness. If you go down the wrong road and you think Emptiness means nothingness. Nothing exists. You can actually get into a very unhealthy state of mind. So don't go down that road. We do exist. We just have to understand correctly how we exist, how we do exist, and get rid of the wrong ideas about ourselves. So we don't have time for questions, but if you have questions, you can send them to Shanti, and I'll do my best to answer them next time. So let's finish with the dedication of our merit, our positive energy. So feel a sense of joy or rejoicing. This topic is difficult. It is difficult to understand. It's challenging. You sometimes feel really confused. That's okay. That's part of the process. Just try the best you can to listen, to understand, and slowly it starts to make more sense. And just making the effort to listen, to learn, to understand is so beneficial, so powerful. So we really are creating a lot of merit, a lot of good energy. So now we dedicate this for the benefit of all beings. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then dedicating for the long lives of our precious teachers, incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world. May you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers, honoring the three sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Okay, thank you. Hope this was helpful for you, and see you next week.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you, Venerable.